Hey everyone, welcome back to Adherent Apologetics, wherever you may be, however you may be joining us. Thank you for making us a part of your day. Today, the show is brought to you, as always, with your support at patreon.com/Adherent Apologetics. Today, I got Tim here from Invoking Theism, really cool YouTube channel. We're going to briefly go over 3 arguments for the existence of God. We're going to go through contingency, the teleological argument, and moral knowledge. What's up, Tim? How you doing?
Hey man, hey guys. I am doing pretty good. Glad to be here.
Yeah, man. Good stuff. So, in case people don't know who you are or what you do, can you just talk a little bit about who you are, Tim?
Yeah. So as my name says, run the channel Invoking Theism, and basically it's basically my public expression of the things I'm studying, things I'm learning in terms of philosophy and science. And those things include mainly like things like in metaphysics and ontology, arguments and from natural theology of that sort, and interviews and discussions. So that's what you'll find if you go and look through my channel.
Yeah, man. You got a lot of really cool stuff on your YouTube channel. I was watching a little bit of it earlier, and it's just you don't release a lot of videos. I know people like to make fun of you, mostly John Dunphy for that, but you have some really good content out there when you've got some stuff going.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah, so we'll kind of just dive into 3 arguments. We're just going to spend probably about 15 minutes on each one. Just give Tim a chance to kind of frame the argument where he's at with his research, and I'll kind of throw at him some of the common objections you'll see from atheists or maybe scholarship. Just depends. So we'll just dive in. We'll start with the argument from contingency. Can you just talk a little bit about that argument and how you think it leads to the existence of God?
Sure. So the contingency argument is my favorite cosmological argument. So because cosmological argument is a genre of arguments, a family of arguments that typically argue for a first cause or an ultimate origin of the universe, and usually starting with one basic feature of reality we all can kind of agree upon, and establishing a case for either a first cause or an ultimate origin that eventually is something that looks a lot like God. So that's kind of like what the cosmological arguments do. And I was a Kalam guy for a while, and that was actually really helpful. But I really like the contingency argument because it allows me to more rigorously look at things, and I feel like it's the most powerful version. And I think you can actually, given the gap problem, I think you can actually establish pretty much perfect being theism from that type of argument. And
could you talk about the gap problem quickly, just in case someone doesn't know what that is?
Yeah. So basically, the gap problem is the last problem a cosmological argument would face, which would be how do we bridge the gap between establishing that there is a first cause or an ultimate origin, and then that first cause or ultimate origin being what we would think God would be. So how do we bridge the gap from first cause to God is an easy way to say it. And so that's kind of like the last thing you do in a cosmological argument is you establish that. So
yeah, good stuff. So can you talk? It seems like in continuity of cosmological arguments, there's kind of this idea that there must be a first cause or there must be a necessary being, and then we kind of get to that from that necessary being to a theistic God like we as Christians believe in. So can you talk a little bit about how we get from a first cause to God?
Yeah. So basically, going with the contingency argument is going from a first cause to God really depends upon how what principles you're working with within an argument. Cosmological arguments start with a sort of explanatory or causal principle, and you're kind of able to take that all the way up. So if you were to say something like all contingent things have explanations, and then you look at like the reality we live in. We say, okay, well, I think I live in a contingent reality, but more contingency can't explain that, or else it would just be more contingency. So we need something um, that is external, or something that will be the foundations of the contingent reality. Now, I think thinking about it that way is good, because if you, some people will just opt in and say, well, um, I think it's just contingency. I think it's just brute. It's an unexplainable type of fact. And I don't think unexplainable contingency is a good way to go. I think you should do that with necessity. So most people would agree that then there is a necessary thing that is the foundations, or the grounding, or the anchoring of the contingent reality, if they can see that we do live in such a reality. And if that's so, I feel like the best route you could go is straight by showing that this is going to be unlike the physical. And I think one of the reasons that you can show that is through what Josh Rasmussen defends, which is called the argument from arbitrary limits, or the problem from arbitrary limits. And the problem from arbitrary limits is saying that something, if something is arbitrarily limited, so it's a limit without an explanation, then that's a problem, because if it's arbitrarily limited, then it could have been any other way, but for some reason it's limited in this way. So, for example, if you take, let's say, the foundations, it can only produce 10 to the 88th particles, or something like that. Well, that's an arbitrary limit, because being consistent with logic, there's nothing that says that a foundation must only produce 10 to the 80th particles. Why is it not 10 to the 89, 10 to the 90th, or 10 to the 70th? It's why that particular feature? And it's a problem because it brings complexity into the question. If you're trying to explain reality, you are providing a metaphysical theory of reality. But if your metaphysical theory is full of arbitrary limits, arbitrary cutoff points, that's actually very complex, because you have all this unexplained stuff that you're supposed to kind of bag in together to explain one kind of feature. So Josh would argue that having a foundation that doesn't have any specified limits is simpler than explanation than one that does. And you could always ask, why is it arbitrarily limited in that type of way? So I think that's one of the more powerful reasons to believe that the foundation of contingent reality would actually be something that doesn't have those limits. So one of the first features I already get is, okay, the foundation is limitless. And I don't really think of any natural thing. I mean, would you, if someone said, oh yeah, I'm a materialist and I believe that the foundations of reality doesn't have any limits, well, it sounds, that sounds more like theism than it does materialism, because at that point, you're not positing a certain type of geometry or structure, or something with a certain amount of energy, or it just gets rid of all that. You don't need that to explain all those things. So,
yeah, I think something interesting that you bring up is the idea of simplicity. So I'm curious, like, what are your views on kind of like, I didn't send you this in the question, so if you're not prepared for it, it's cool. But what do you think about the idea of like the doctrine of divine simplicity? Like, do you think that's kind of like a necessary thing that you get with like this argument from contingency?
I think that the divine doctrine of divine simplicity it is a purely philosophical one, but I hold to divine simplicity, but I need to specify, I don't hold to a Thomistic version of divine simplicity. I don't accept. I have my own reservations when it comes to Thomas Aquinas's, or what Thomists today term absolute divine simplicity. But I think that thinking of God as not simple is not a good way to go. thinking of God as being composed and having constituent parts isn't good, because again, it goes into, well, those are limits, and then that needs further explanation. Anything that is composed in a particular arrangement, but why that particular arrangement, and why those things. So I think that if God was not simple, he would not be uncaused. So when we say simple, it's just like in philosophy, it's something that cannot be decomposed, something that has no composition.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I was gonna say, so God has like no like parts that can be reduced in his nature, right? Is that kind of what you're going with?
Exactly. And I would agree with the Thomists that God doesn't have a form. He doesn't have a geometry. He doesn't, have those things. That is not what instantiates him in reality. It's not that he's instantiated within a particular structure, but rather he is the structure, so, and Thomas would say that he's undifferentiated being, and I'm still kind of iffy on what that really means entirely, but there's good papers and stuff defending divine simplicity without having to go all the way down the Thomistic route.
So there are a couple of, maybe one or two objections at you before we get into this, and I think one thing, I know Paulogia, I think his name, kind of went after you with the kind of a different idea on Twitter, but kind of this idea of the principle of sufficient reason, like there's reasons for things that exist. So I know you covered it in your recent video, but can you talk a little bit about like PSR, what it is, and why you think that we need it? There's nothing that like exists without explanation, I guess you could say.
Yeah, so just kind of speak about what the PSR is and things of that sort.
Yeah.
Okay. So basically the PSR is the principle of sufficient reason. And the principle of sufficient reason was posited by a philosopher and mathematician, Gottfried Leibniz. And it was also adopted by Spinoza. And basically it's a principle in which I think undergirds kind of our reason itself. When we're doing reason, I think that we assume the PSR. So basically, it's a principle that states that the strongest versions would state that if there is a fact, that fact has an explanation. So all facts have explanations for why they obtain. There's a reason why. My table that have my laptop on is in the particular region of the house it is, because that's a fact. It's a fact that there are clouds in the sky, and there's an explanation as to why, in terms of atmospheric physics and things of that sort. So it seems to be very just unproblematic, and so but like anything in philosophy, there are some controversial things, and even atheist philosopher Graham Moppy holds to a PSR. There are actually different versions of it. And so this is where we need to differentiate between strong versions and weak versions. So the PSR is true. I think we agree that these facts. But the one that Dr. Alexander Proust argues for in the Blackwell Companion in his contingency argument paper is one that simply states any contingent fact has an explanation. So he just boils it down to facts that are contingent. I agree with him. The facts that we concern ourselves with in this reality are facts that are dependent. They are contingent, and those do have explanations. And basically, if you're doing science, you're pretty much assuming this principle. You're saying, I'm going to go study the galaxies, and I'm going to go create a model. And you're assuming that your model can be created, or you can attempt to create a model that accurately describe what's happening. Cosmologists truly think that they're going to figure out universe's origins. So science is built upon this, and for those who love evolution, we if you were to deny this principle, that anybody could say that the transition from our ape cousins to Homo sapiens would be it would just be, it just happened. But like, no, we know that there's an explanation of that, and we do that, and the explanation is evolutionarily and things of common descent of that sort. So explanations exist, and Leibniz even said, even if the explanation may not even be known to us at the time, there's an explanation. Now, this is where things get controversial. If you take a strong version of the PSR that every fact has an explanation, it suffers from a clever argument called from bootstrapping or the modal collapse, which basically says that, well, if you're going to say that you're basically saying that everything is it boils down to, it collapses into everything being necessary. If everything has an explanation, then everything will be explained by something and something, and then you get to the necessity. But then if that necessity is supposed to explain all those facts boil down in that necessity, then then we really shouldn't think that there's really any contingency going on here, and everything should be necessary, because this necessary thing is the thing explaining it, but it's actually entailing it. So it's like an entailment principle thing, and basically, Christian philosopher Peter Van Eenwagen argues this, but only if you use a principle that entails the existence of things. So it's like how can a necessary thing produce a contingent effect? Basically, it's basically the problem there. If you say everything has an explanation, but if you do it in terms of either a thing's existence or without entailing an explanation that's not entailing, then you can avoid that, and that's what philosophers like Graham Oppie think about that. So there are other things thrown at the PSR as well, but I think I think that's I think it's safe, and it's just one principle among many other explanatory principles, but I think it's pretty safe.
Yeah, and I think the principle of sufficient reason, I'll just add one thing before we transition, is very intuitive. Like, you don't think there's not many people who deny it in their everyday lives. So can you talk a little bit about the teleological argument? It's the idea of design, which points to a designer. I know you've been working on this and studying this. So can you talk a little bit about the teleological argument?
Yeah. So I have always been interested in good arguments and things, and as I read and as I study, what I've noticed is there's not a lot of literature, contemporary literature, on defending teleological arguments in terms of biology. Like, so we have these cosmological arguments and things. We have fine tuning, which has to do with cosmic fine tuning, but there's not a lot. Like, it almost feels like ever since William Paley's Watchmaker, like that was pretty much all we've got going. So I'm convinced by the fine tuning argument. I think it's cool. I think Robin Collins has done great work on this subject, and I recommend anybody to read his work and Luke Barnes's work on that. But what I've noticed is that whenever you try to speak about teleology in terms of biology, pretty much an atheist will pretty much just go, wait, stop, and he'll just put Darwin's face up to you and be like, remember this guy? That's why we don't talk about teleology and biology. And I always thought that was wrong. Like even when I was a young Earth creationist, like I always thought that even if evolution were true, it would be evidence of it still be evidence of an intelligence like God. So putting that to the side, I've been doing a lot of research into the field of evolutionary biology, and that has been a really, 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 really interesting project I set out. I didn't know where it was going to take me. I just wanted to be informed, but it took me to really actually see evolution in its most sophisticated and most up to date and way possible in understanding it. And what I've noticed is that actually evolution is they're actually, I see teleology within evolution, and I don't see what a lot of these atheists who claim that Darwin did away with teleology and biology, as Richard Dawkins would say. And there's multiple more reasons for that. But with my knowledge up to this point, with reading articles, literature, listening to interviews, lectures, it's unsubstantiated. And so, if you want me to go into like how that kind of plays into everything, I can. Or do you
take a few minutes and just kind of go into like what you see in evolutionary biology that kind of leads you to this teleological argument.
Cool. Yeah. So basically, we have to. If I was going to argue from design, most people would put me in the intelligent design camp because the type of design that I was able to make an inference from biology was actually something that is way more nuanced than the classic intelligent design way. And here's why. So when I look into the research, what I see is a dwindling of neo-Darwinism, which is the kind of forward formula of evolution: natural selection, random mutation. And that's how evolution works. There's heritable variation and descent with modification, and that should be sufficient with lots of time to explain novelties, innovations, species, populations, and things of that sort. And so natural selection is the creative force, and the mutations are the things that provide the variation for natural selection to act upon, that type of thing. Well, that's a very outdated view. Very, very, very outdated view. And that view has been superseded by a view in which bacterial geneticist James Shapiro calls natural genetic engineering. And he says, well, actually, evolution is actually a set of complex mechanisms and processes all working together to produce change. And it's a 24/7 thing. It's not like they're waiting up, the organism is waiting upon a random mutation to occur to do something. But it's a constant maintaining of homeostasis and doing things to produce refinements and improvements within the organism. So what I see there, and this is empirically backed up. This is not to no scientist in the field is controversial. That what I see is, okay, so nature is bent on making sure that life flourishes. I'm like, interesting. Why would it do that? If I was to compare naturalism and theism, what I expect on a naturalism for there to be this life, stable, reproducible complexity, a complex dynamical system of that sort, what I expect naturalism to produce that type of effect. It seems like there's something, there seems to be some purposeful thing going on here in the sense of why must the show go on in terms of life and biology. So anyways, just put that philosophical consideration there to the side. And so anyways, there's many sources of variation. Random mutation is one, but it's not one that delivers any type of, you would never get deer antlers or anything like that from just random mutation. It's many mechanisms and processes working together, being done by the cell to produce change. So the cell actually is equipped with pretty much programming abilities. It's able to edit its own genome and produce effects. And so I'm like, okay, well, what's the origin of this? What's the best explanation for that? The most basic units of life are actually impugned with the ability to harness and direct and improve their situation through information processing, problem solving, etc. So what I see in nature is a lot of teleology here. Every single evolutionary change that happens for a reason. There is a direction. The cells have a toolkit of many different responses they can give to a particular situation. And they don't just happen at any time or anywhere. They happen in a way that is purposeful for that situation. So it's kind of like if you're driving along you're driving along and you realize, oh, my car needs more oil, and then you realize I have to go put more oil in my car so that my car runs smoothly so I can maintain it more. That's kind of what a cell does. They recognize a situation and they recognize that they need to respond in some particular way. So I see a lot of teleology there. And then one last part, which is the structuralist literature basically argues and shows empirically that there are these natural laws that govern biological form, and there's only a few ways in which organismal form can actually manifest itself. And actually, there's many patterns in nature of the same forms kind of being used, but to produce different types of structures and species doing different things. So we have these natural laws that govern form. We have the directedness of nature trying to flourish life and can change itself in a very purposeful way, directed way. I see a lot of teleology there. And so I was like, I'm like, I need to capitalize on this opportunity to philosophically and scientifically show that nature is fine-tuned to bring to harbor, bring about, and maintain life. And that's all on the backs of a mind, intentionality. So I'm not even arguing that's the difference between me and intelligent design. I'm not even arguing that, an intelligence is giving information out or producing new species. It's right at the beginning of the cosmos. The whole blueprint was already set up, and the natural laws basically do the construction work. So that's my view, and that's what I'm advancing. But there's a very, very, very simplistic way to describe it. There's a lot more to unpack, but that's just kind of the gist of it.
Yeah, I got you. I think one of the most common objections I think that we'd see to your view is the idea that we'll say, hey, if you give it enough time and enough location, eventually improbable events can occur, and we have no need to posit any sort of God to explain these things that seem very challenged to explain from a pure naturalistic perspective. So I'm curious kind of what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's like to even get the evolution of life to actually happen, you need all that fine tuning, and that's what a lot of people don't understand. Which is like life, they feel like you can get life so easily, and what you need to get life is you need the proper physics, you need the proper chemistry, and then you need the proper environments, so that stable, reproducible complexity can actually arrive at conscious moral agents such as ourselves. It's kind of that question, like, why didn't life go beyond unicellular life? So it's like, if we look at, we have to remember that theism isn't trying to explain fine tuning. It's trying to explain why there's fine tuning. So I think, and I think that's what a lot of Christians should realize, is that we're not trying to explain the fine tuning data, because that sounds like we're pitting ourselves against science. What we're trying to do is explain why there's fine tuning data. Basically, why should we expect there to be fine-tuned universe on theism or naturalism? You start with the hypothesis of mind, and we live in a universe where there's other minds. You start with the hypothesis with non-rationality, non-mind, impersonal, and we live in a universe in which produces personal, rational, conscious creatures. And you compare the two hypotheses and go, well, which one is more likely to be true? Hypothesis more likely to be true given this data. And I think theism wins that. I think it's very, very low on naturalism that you would expect there to be a finely tuned universe. A single naturalistic universe where only had one go, that you would get a type of universe like that. So that's kind of roughly kind of what the argumentation consists of. And so that's kind of like why there's retreats to multiverse theories, or that physics itself is necessary, which means that life is necessary and that life had to happen. I even think if someone says that life must be, I think that's actually works more in favor of a theistic view, because literally it's saying that there's no way that physics could have been different. There must have been life. And I'm like, why would naturalism have such, why would that be a naturalistic universe? There must be life. It kind of goes against the whole idea that we're supposed to be this corner of the universe that doesn't matter. That whole view.
Yeah, I guess.
But if life is necessary, like, then what's really? But anyways, go ahead.
No, you're good, bro. I'll transition here. You can add any thoughts if you want. Do you have any thoughts you want to add before we go into the moral argument for like just a few minutes?
One other thing I would say is, it's just all about weighing the likelihoods. We're not using statistical probability here. That we are looking at what's logically possible. We have a set of parameters, that being the way that the physics exemplifies itself in our universe, and those parameters can take a numerous amount of forms in which life wouldn't be able to arise or even go past unicellular organisms to produce conscious embodied moral agents. So it's basically like a contingency argument for physics, like why these parameters versus other parameters. And so I think that theism does it well there, because you can put it in the sense of, well, it's a mind that has that's why the parameters are consistent on mind, which cares about the flourishing of creatures. And I think that would fit a view of a kind of a foundational mind that's good, sounds like God. So I would just put that there. And I find that a helpful way to look at it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's go to moral knowledge quickly, just for a few minutes before we have to end this stream. So can you just talk a little bit about this idea of moral knowledge, defending it, and just kind of like the moral argument in general?
Yeah, so the moral argument has always been a really cool one for me. I really liked it because basically the moral argument, an argument for moral knowledge, basically says basically uses moral realism, which says that basically I like the definition that Dr. Andrew Fisher gives, that moral judgments can be true or false, that sometimes they are true, and that what makes them true is independent of people's or groups of people's beliefs, judgments, or desires. And basically what that means is there are actual moral facts. There are objective moral facts in reality. And what the moral argument tries to do is it tries to go, well, what best explains the existence of moral facts? These are things that are not material, they're abstract, but they govern our lives. They are the reason why we want to vote. They're the reason why we want to dedicate our lives to a particular profession that is not even about us. It's very it pervades every human's life. Morality does. And so we seem to have these moral facts. It's like, well, what best explains them? And the moral argument says the best explanation is that there is a rational source that transcends human minds, which is the source of morality. There's a foundational source that transcends human minds. So we live in a universe created by a foundational mind, in which is rational, in which is the source of the moral realm that we can access. Mm-hmm. So that's what I like about the moral argument, because it's an inference to the best explanation upon the features of the world that we see, and one of those is morality. So either you can think morality is subjective, or you can think of morality is relative, subjective, or just even more stronger view. Morality is actually just preference based. It is the non-cognitive stance would say that moral sentences don't actually mean anything. They're statement of preference, and I guess, disgust or dislike, but they don't really morally mean anything. So there's many different routes someone can go if they don't really think. But the whole idea is to get them on board with moral realism. Well, certain arguments. But anyways, we can talk more about that. But that's kind of like the whole kind of like how I think about it.
Yeah, I think something, probably the last question we'll get to before we have to wrap things up here, is it's interesting. How would you defend moral realism? Because I think a lot of people would be like, well, you can't measure it, you can't see it, things like that, in an empirical sense. So how would you defend moral realism?
Well, yeah. So moral realism, I mean that's the funny thing about it is it's not something that can be put under a microscope. It's not something that can be verified um, through physics, and that's but that's okay. I mean, philosopher A.J. Ayer, when he lived during the very verificationistic era of philosophy, said that you know, if you disliked racism, really what you're saying is, I don't really like this thing, but you're not really saying anything moral because of his verificationistic philosophy. But since verificationism has died off, and lots of progress has been made, actually, there's a philosophy survey that actually says that majority of philosophers actually lean towards moral realism. More philosophy actually more college students are relativists compared to their philosophy professors. So in the area of philosophy, moral realism is the majority view. So basically, more it's intuitive. So it's one of those things that you kind of don't really have to doubt that much. It's the more obvious thing. It's the more clear thing to us. So how I treat intuitions is I say, well, until I have a defeater for my intuition, I'm going to trust it. And so many people can offer defeaters because it's the less obvious premise. The less obvious premise is that moral facts exist. The more obvious premise is that moral facts exist. The least obvious premise is that moral facts don't exist. So here's the thing, is that moral disagreement actually shows something about morality. It shows that the reason why we disagree and the reason why we want to run for office and legislate things on healthcare and things of that sort is because every human is trying to understand what the moral thing is to do, but we're fallible. So our abilities to attempts in understanding what moral facts are, we are fallible in doing so. That actually is why moral disagreement happens. It's just we are not perfectly able to apprehend what's the moral thing to do. So moral progress is actually made from the fact that we actually discover what the right thing to do is or what the wrong thing to do is. So actually, as we gain knowledge, our moral knowledge increases, and we are able to see and act in a way that's objective and things. And so I think that's one reason that's morality. The more obvious premise is that moral facts do exist, and if we think about moral actions between humans, that would moral actions between humans would just be manifestations of objective moral values and duties. And so those are just kind of a couple of reasons why I think. And a common objection, if that's okay if I bring up an objection,
go for it,
is evolution. I think that's what you wanted to bring up too, right?
That's one of the things I sent you. Yeah.
Yeah. The evolution objection says that, our moral intuitions were given to us because of evolution. We've been biologically programmed for adaptive reasons to believe, to have these moral intuitions because they were helpful to us. But evolution is the wrong mechanism to use to establish moral facts. So, like, even if somebody were to give a complete evolutionary account of morality, it would only explain how we came to know moral facts. It would not ground them, because evolution is a survival of the fittest mechanism. It is not a truth grounding mechanism about the world. So it would get us cognitively to a place to be able to reason with one another. And that's the interesting part, is that morality is a rational enterprise. To act morally, you have to be able to reason. You have to be able to decide and make a decision based on what's happening. So evolution would have just kind of, granting the argument, would have kind of just taken us along the path to a point where we can actually do that, but it wouldn't create the moral values. And so that just confuses moral epistemology, how we come to know things that are moral, and moral ontology, which is the what is moral, the foundations of morality, what morality actually it's not just discovering moral things or knowing what's good and what's bad, but the meta ethical part of it. So yeah, I just don't think that a survival of the fittest mechanism can actually ground moral facts.
Yeah, Tim, lots of great stuff, man. I was going to start to wrap things up here if that works for you, because I know we're closing in on time, Tim. So any last thoughts? And then after that, just plug all your stuff so people can follow Invoking Theism, all the cool stuff you got going on.
Yeah, it was really cool. Love doing this. Basically, one thing I would say is anybody who's listening and who is agnostic or skeptical about theism and things of that sort, just remember to think about theism as a explanatory hypothesis and not a scientific one. So theism has never been against science, but rather it's an inference to a more foundational ultimate theory. It's a theory about reality. So that's why I like these arguments. And but yeah, follow me on Twitter. That's where I'm most active. I kind of just dump my thoughts there throughout the day, and just subscribe to my channel.
Yeah, good stuff. I encourage everyone to go follow Tim, Invoking Theism. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe and enjoy I hope you can enjoy all the content we have coming out. You can follow us at Adherent Apologetics everywhere. And if you enjoy this show, you can support the show at patreon.com/Adherent Apologetics, or you can become a member, and we're going to hopefully have some cool emojis coming out soon. So you know what it is. Tim, it's been fun, man. Really appreciate the time.